My mother had a stroke when I was in my third year of my Ph.D. studies, and for 90 days she was on this planet until she died. For 81 of those days, I allowed the healthcare system to choreograph and control her dying experience. And I'm not exactly sure why I did that, except that that's what our family always did. When someone was sick, especially when they were dying, we let someone else care for them. I only changed that routine when my mother had 2 horrific accidents in a hospice. And it was at that point that I decided that I could potentially do better than the professionals could. And that changed me. Today we're starting a series, the first of a film in a series called Dying Lessons, a Love Story. And we're beginning it in the room where my mother died. I wanted to try to normalize death for everyone, but I think when I really consider what I'm trying to do, it's to try to help us to understand how very sacred death is. Birth and death. Birth introduces us to this experience here where we begin our story. Death is the end of that story, and we should be willing to listen to it, and we should be willing to care for those who are at that point. So when my mother was on her journey, she spent these 81 days in a variety of institutions, from hospitals to rehabilitation centers to hospices. And in all of those environments, I knew that she wasn't experiencing, first of all, the best of care, but also nothing seemed comfortable. Most everything seemed wrong. You look at your environment and you look at what makes you feel inspired and beloved, and the sterile environment of hospitals certainly doesn't do that. The bells and whistles and sirens of the medical equipment doesn't help you either. So none of it seemed right. When my mother had 2 horrific falls in a hospice in one morning, I knew I couldn't bring her home immediately, because now it was even harder to care for her, but eventually I realized that I had to bring her home. So, not knowing what to do for the dying, I did what I thought was best. I created an environment that was peaceful. I had lace curtains on the window. I had lavender potpourri. I had beautiful paintings on the walls that were in colors my mother loved. And I was with her, I would want to say 24/7. I slept in the same room with her. She died actually right where I'm sitting. The morning my mother died, I was holding her hand. And I told her that I loved her, and I thanked her for everything that she had ever done for me. Her experience, her 90-year experience, had been really filled with challenges, and I believe I was one of those. And so I thanked her for everything she ever did, and I told her I would always love her. I also told her that God would make this easy for her. And I told her I would not let go of her hand until she was with God, and within moments, she died. My husband was with me at the time. I was holding my mother's hand. He had his, I was sitting and he had his hands on my shoulders. He thought she needed more morphine, but I knew that she was gone. And the only reason I knew was because this room that I'm sitting in right now, this room turned into a room filled with golden light. And it was like glitter in a snow globe. It was something I had never expected and certainly had never seen before, but yet at the same time, it felt oddly familiar. And at first I felt enveloped by this golden light, but then I felt like this light came into my very being. And I felt like my mother was giving me the sense that she knew me, but then also that she loved me, and then that light was gone. During the 9-day period of time where I had my mother here, I remember calling my Ph.D. committee chairperson, and I was sobbing. I was doing that a lot that week. And I was sobbing because I told her I needed to change my PhD dissertation topic. I had gotten halfway done with a topic on corporate social responsibility. I was really committed to studying how companies could help their communities by doing the right things for their employees and their people, the communities that provided those people. But I realized that a more important topic I needed to understand was death. And I felt embarrassed to admit it because why didn't I know anything about death? Why don't most of us know anything about death? So I think she said yes, hoping I would change my mind, but I didn't change my mind. And after my mother died, I spent the next 55 weeks studying death. And I read almost 85 books and other documents. I watched documentaries, and I interviewed both family caregivers and professional caregivers. And I did all of that so I could understand something that I feel that we should just know about, and we should teach our children about it, and we should understand that that is a universal experience. I learned through my research that dying is not optional, and it sounds like it's a no-brainer, but many of us are walking around in our day-to-day lives not thinking about our mortality. And I'm not saying we need to focus on it totally, but we were, until the pandemic, one of the few countries in the world where people would wake up and not even think about death, whereas people in what they're calling underdeveloped countries, they never know if they will make it through the day. But in our culture, we usually don't even think of that. So most of us want to die surrounded by people we love, artifacts we've collected throughout our lives that have meaning to us, beloved pets, plants. I think we want to be able to spend our remaining days and weeks and hours on this planet in a way similar to the way we've actually lived our lives. I believe that we should be able to plan our dying experiences as we have planned our day-to-day schedules. And quite honestly, if you don't die the way you want to die, you will die the way someone else thinks you should. And I don't think we want to do that much longer. So the pandemic has changed things for many of us. I wrote my PhD dissertation and then a few years later translated that into a book, and then the pandemic hit. And at first I thought that the pandemic no longer made my book or my advocacy relevant, because all of us are now placed in a position where we could be dying the way our senior citizens have been dying. For the most of my mother's caregiving experience, or care receiving experience, I should say, she was tended to by strangers, wearing personal protection equipment. So she could never see their smiles. She could never see their look of sadness or look of concern, and she was never touched by the human hand. So one of the reasons why I want to offer these segments is so that you can understand not only what the healthcare industry and the dying industry have available for you, but I also want you to understand that if you make the decision to care for a beloved elder, what you are up against. And I only did it for 9 days, and it was exhausting, but it was the most transformative, rewarding work I have ever done. And so I want to be able to share with you what it's going to take. And earlier I had talked about, the normalcy of dying, but I just want to remind you again that it was an incredibly spiritual event for me. And throughout my research then, I did talk to other people about whether or not they experienced similar spiritual events, and I'll be sharing some of those stories with you. We are all storytellers. My research taught me how to honor each and every one of those storytellers, and then to create my own story. And I think my biggest sadness with my mother is that for those last 9 days, and even the 90 days when she was in a variety of institutions, although I was right there for her, I didn't know what to do. I could have been asking her questions that helped her make meaning of her life. I could have been letting her know how meaningful she was to my life. I found out that in the end, what really matters to dying people is that they mattered to someone else. And I regret, other than just telling my mother those simple words, "I love you," that I didn't give her the details. Because by that time in her life, she may have forgotten some of them. And knowing those details, those moments when she had been my inspiration and my sole source of help, those would have helped her. In the end, I think that I gave her the best dying experience I knew how to give her. But I would like to be able to show you how to do that as well, but also share with you information that could have helped me give her an even better one. So death is not a topic that anyone I have found wants to talk about. I don't even really like talking about it because it's so serious. It's an event that basically takes us off all of our social calendars, regardless of what our plans for the week were. It takes us out of relationships. It takes us out of moments that we are inspired by. And so no one wants to talk about it. But I believe that once you do, and once you realize that you are mortal, you'll make different decisions. You'll spend every single waking moment of your life in a different fashion, because I know that happened to me. Being intimately involved with the death of my mother helped me to become a better human being. So in my journey to understand death and dying, the first thing I learned, obviously, was that death is not an option. The second thing I learned was that the dying people have a Bill of Rights. And who knew? We'll talk about that in the next segment, because that's where we should start. Thanks.